Hello, and welcome to Better Than Fine, the podcast where we talk about what it means to live life above zero. If zero is just doing okay, but you want to be doing better than okay, you want to flourish, you want to thrive, you want to figure out what it means to do those things. Well, this podcast is for you. We're going to talk about the intersection of ancient wisdom and modern science, of philosophy and fitness, of wellness and well-being, and the techniques that you can cultivate in your life to figure out what it means to live life above zero, to be better than fine. And I'm your host, Darlene Marshall. I've got a decade in the fitness industry, as well as working as a holistic wellness coach, and I'm currently a master's candidate in applied positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. And welcome. In today's episode, we're going to talk about something that's been coming up. Even though this is a pretty new project, I'm already hearing a bit of feedback of people asking about mindfulness. And today's episode is, what the hell is mindfulness? What is it? When we talk about it, everyone's talking about it right now. It's every guru, every coach, every fitness professional, everybody is talking about this phenomenon of mindfulness. But for a lot of people, it's really confusing. And if you are one of those people that has tried it, you don't get it, you're struggling, well, this episode's intended to help you understand mindfulness, at least what it is that we're talking about, and maybe take some proactive steps to cultivate it in your life. So let's get after it. So let's just start with, what the hell is mindfulness? You've probably had the experience at some point in your life of, you had a thought, you didn't like that thought, you wish that you'd never had that thought. And so then you start arguing with that thought, you're reacting to having had it, and there's a ping pong back and forth. And then at some point you realize, like, oh, I'm arguing with myself about this. That's bananas. That awareness, that first that you even had the thought you didn't like at all, that you didn't identify with it, you're like, ooh, that's not a great one. And then later on, when you realize, like, oh, I'm fighting with myself right now, what the hell is this? Those two events were your own awareness of your own mind. That thing is mindfulness. And this is where it gets a little confusing, because as we develop psychologically as human beings, we don't have an awareness of our own consciousness. We have thoughts, we think that those thoughts are it. And unless you have a really exceptional adult in your life to teach you along the way that your thoughts are not you, we identify with our thoughts. We think that we are them. But really, our thoughts are just an experience that our mind is having. Like, this organ in our skull is producing a series of, electrical impulses that create a thought. But you are not just a product of your thoughts. You are something else. You are that awareness thing happening in a physical body. And that awareness thing we call consciousness. It's just the fact that you are alive at all. That's consciousness. And your conscious awareness, where you're like, oh, I'm having a thought right now. Oh, my eyebrow itches. I can choose whether or not to scratch it. That awareness is consciousness. And the observation of the thoughts, of the experience, is mindfulness. So when we talk about mindful awareness, we're talking about, like, taking a step removed, intentional step removed from whatever your experience is and observing it. That's mindful awareness. That's the practice of mindfulness. And it's one of those things that, so all of these meditation teachers, these mindfulness teachers, these gurus over the course of however long you want to label it, whether it's decades in the West or thousands of years in India, what they've been teaching is all these tricks to try to trick you into experiencing that mindful awareness of consciousness and mind because it's one of those things in life that you can't just explain to somebody and they're like, oh yeah, I get that. It's not math. It's phenomenon, it's experience. So how do you trigger someone to experience something? Those are all of the tricks of mindfulness. And different things work for different consciousness because we're all a unique set of experiences. So it's not like one universal truth of like, okay, you do this practice and then you have your awakening and oh, now you're woke and now you know what mindfulness is. No, it doesn't work that way. So that's why we have like breathing techniques and walking techniques and yoga and mantra meditation and Zen. Like all of these are different practices to teach you awareness of yourself. So then we get into this argument of great book, Why Buddhism is True. I'm glancing at my bookshelf to see it will jump out at me. No, unfortunately, I apologize. I'll put it in the show notes. So I'll put it in the show notes, the author. But Why Buddhism is True is a great differentiation of mindfulness practice, which is the practice of observing phenomenon in the mind from the perspective of consciousness, and concentration exercises, which are just how well can I rope my brain back into focusing on something. Concentration exercise takes the mindful awareness in order to recognize when your mind has wandered. And concentration is essential in order to cultivate a mindfulness practice. So there's a reciprocal interchange, but they are different. I feel like a flight attendant if you're watching on the video right now. So one of the layers, and this is the interesting thing for me, is that I've been practicing mindfulness for, on some level, for I think 14 years. About that. Yeah, because I started as an actor and I was interested in yoga. And that's kind of how I stumbled into these practices. But the interesting thing for me is that there's so many layers to it where you think like, oh, I've got this. I understand what this is. And then something comes along that shifts your awareness of what you're practicing. And there's a whole nother layer underneath what you thought you knew for you to discover. And I find it fascinating that if you stick with this kind of practice, you continue to discover layers in yourself and therefore layers in other people, which is just fascinating. And one of the things that you find is that the churn of the conversation in your mind, the different thoughts, the things that you identify with so often aren't even true, that they turn out to be belief. And we'll do another episode at some point about examining belief and what is belief and what does that mean. But just at the base nugget of it, consider that a lot of the things that you're raised in, believing that they are truth, that they are fact, that they are the foundation of reality, are actually just beliefs. And if this vein of thought interests you, Don Miguel Ruiz's The Four Agreements is what sparked this whole level of understanding for me. But so much of the things that your mind is telling you are truth, are fact, are ringing the bell of reality, are actually just kind of lies, because they're not foundational facts, they are belief. And cultivating mindful awareness allows you to discover those things. So something like, take mindful eating. My friend, coach, brilliant, beautiful woman named Leah D'Souza, does a mindful eating workshop. And she does it in person, she does it remotely. They're both great experiences. But in it, she's getting you to slowly, consciously, mindfully observe yourself in the act of eating. And how often do we eat something very quickly? We're not really tasting it. We get to the end of what we're eating and then we feel this sense of like regret and longing that the meal's almost over, but we weren't really experiencing it in the first place. And or you're binge eating and you tell yourself, oh, I can't stop. Oh, why can't I stop? You telling yourself that you can't stop is in fact a lie. You could stop. You could just stop. It's just a thought. But if any time your mind tells you something like that, you believe it, then you really can't stop until you have the thought, oh, but I could stop. I could stop right now. I could put my fork down, I could throw the rest away or put it in the fridge and have it later. Until that thought exists in your mind, it's not real. Cultivating mindfulness and mindful eating is creating enough space to have the opportunity to recognize the lie of I can't stop, to make the opportunity for I can make a different choice. And that's just one application of this practice. So if mindfulness is watching yourself, you can use anything for mindfulness. And Sam Harris, his app Waking Up, I've been doing it for a couple of months. He uses the phrase that anything is a phenomena in consciousness. So recently I was giving a talk, and I'm sitting, so normally in the past when I've done public speaking or when I was acting, I would be in some separate space or in the back, and I could do whatever prep work I wanted to get myself in the right headspace so that it was my turn. I was like ready to deliver. But this time I was sitting in the front, and there were other speakers before me. And while they were speaking, my heart rate was accelerating, and I was starting to get really anxious because it was kind of a big deal and I needed to do a good job for a lot of reasons. And I started to get anxious. And I thought of this thing about the observation of phenomena in consciousness, this phrase that Sam Harris uses. And I was able to catch myself because one of the things that happens is we have this physiological reaction to things. And then we have an emotional response to our physiology. And then on top of that, we have the reaction to our reactions. And that can either make it better or worse. But until you are aware that all of those layers exist, you're just having reactions to reactions and like climbing. And you don't get the opportunity to interrupt yourself. So what happened is in the past, I would have this kind of anxiety panic reaction, and then I would get up to speak and I'd stumble and mumble, and internally I'd been thinking how much I'm messing up. And instead, I heard Sam Harris's voice in my mind, and I heard a few other people who had given me advice about that kind of presentation. And I caught myself. And I came back to, instead of reacting to my reactions, I just came back to like feeling the accelerated heart rate and recognizing that that was just an experience of my body. And then I thought about some other advice that I'd gotten about choosing to have that physiological response communicate to you like, no, my body's just getting ready to stand up and deliver. This is just my, adrenal hormones and my heart rate recognizing that I'm in a situation where I have to be able to present well, and I'm upregulating to be able to be like really focused and present. And so what would have in the past been an anxiety attack was actually me being really focused because the adrenaline let me really focus. And that was because I was able to just observe the phenomenon in consciousness, be mindfully aware of my body's reaction and my mind's tendency to add layers to it, and then choose a different response at a certain layer that worked its way back down to my like foundational experience. And you can apply this to anything. And this is why we're having so many of these exciting new mindfulness tools coming up all over. There's so many meditation apps. There's so many services and corporate environments giving application to this practice in a bunch of different avenues. So I mentioned Leah D'Souza's mindful eating workshops. There's also mindful coupling, like conscientious coupling and conscientious relationships, all of these tools around how to mindfully observe the interchange between you and your partner or partners so that you can choose the kind of relationship you want mindfully. It's like life crafting on this really fundamental finite levels that I think wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for this wave of awareness that's coming into our lives. it increases your self-awareness, because as you gain mindfulness, you gain a sense of like, oh, well, who is this person that I am in the world right now? And do I want to be them? Because as you gain awareness, you gain the opportunity for regulation and change. You can't change a pattern that you don't know exists. So as you enhance awareness, as you enhance mindfulness, you become aware of your own subconscious patternings. They become consciousness. And then you have the choice around the things that you just wrote do you not want to do them anymore? If I decided right now that it's irritating for me to play with my hands while I'm talking on the video, well, then I'll root my hands in my lap. And if that's true, please give me the feedback. So hopefully some of these ideas have helped you better understand what mindfulness is when we talk about it, what we mean when we talk about consciousness, we talk about conscious awareness or self-awareness. When we talk about mindfulness meditations, they're meditations where you're observing what's coming up in your mind. Now, what's interesting to me is a lot of people are doing concentration exercises where you're like focusing the mind back on a focal point. That's teaching you to concentrate. It's not necessarily mindful observation. And that book, Why Buddhism is True, helps to really dig into those nuances if that is an area of interest for you. So when it comes to starting a mindfulness practice, there are so many good apps out there. And really, I think it comes down to making the time and space and the commitment to be consistent. Because any change, any adaptation in your mind, in your body, in your human experience, in your habit, all of that requires consistency. So if this interests you, if you hear the benefit that it, and it's stress reduction and down regulation, and it makes change easier, it makes self-awareness easier, self-regulation, autonomy, all of the benefits from the psychological scientific perspective, we know this practice is really good for you. So if you're on it, you drank the Kool-Aid, you get it. I suggest starting with an app that speaks to you. So Calm is supposed to be great. Headspace is great. I have a lot of clients who've started with Headspace. I do Waking Up. It's a little bit more of a aggressive advanced practice. But if you're ready to dig right in, if you're a whole hog kind of person, Waking Up is great. There are plenty of meditation retreats and classes and coaches out there now. There's lots of options, but the real choice, I think, is you have to choose that you're going to do it, that you're going to commit, and then make the space. So we know from habit change research that when it comes to this kind of micro habits, the best way to do it is to anchor it in a daily practice. So whether it's a set time or, after I brush my teeth, I will go meditate. So it's either anchored to an action or set at a time. That tends to be the most successful ways to implement this type of micro habit. That's it for today. I hope this has been helpful. The show notes will have a link to the book as well as some additional resources. Please hit up any questions that you have in the comments. Find me on Instagram. I'm at darlene.coach. That's the best way to reach me other than emailing darlene@darlene.coach. And my website is, of course, darlene.coach. And we'll see you real soon.